Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala nabiyil kareem wa ala alihi wa ashabi ajma'een. So today, inshallah, we are going to have a short discussion on the concept of fiction. And I've already had this discussion last week on Twitter. We had a Twitter space covering this topic. That wasn't recorded, and a lot of people had requested a recording that they could listen to later or show to others. As it was a very interactive discussion, the summary of it has been shared multiple times across Facebook and Twitter, and I keep getting these questions over and over again. People want me to cover it in a video. So this video is going to be dedicated to everything that I've been asked over the past few weeks and really over the past few years related to fiction. Before we begin, why? Why did this topic come up? Well, over the years, I have debated with myself about whether I should write fiction or not. As you know, most of my books are non-fiction, right? I've written books on time management, books on history, books on personal development, books on tafsir. But every time I bring up the issue of writing fiction, I have some sincere and well-meaning brothers and sisters tell me that fiction is haram, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of your efforts, uh, and a lot of misconceptions are raised. And recently, I have been rethinking this topic. I have been actually been thinking about writing fiction again. So what I've done in the past, for example, is just two things I've written in the past that will count as fiction. One is my short book, Ahmed Climbs a Mountain, which is a parable about how to achieve your goals. So I called it a parable, so it'll be less controversial and wouldn't be considered fiction because for some reason it's considered different in people's mind. And the other was a children's book called The Greeting of Peace, which is a fictional story of an uncle going for a walk with his nephew and teaching him some of the azkar and their meanings. Alhamdulillah, both of these books have done well and people have found it beneficial. Nonetheless, this question comes up very often, which is, is fiction haram? Or I heard from a certain sheikh that fiction is haram, or I've read on a certain fatwa website that fiction is haram. So is it? Is it really haram? Well, that's what we're going to discuss today, inshallah. And to begin, the fatwa, is fiction haram? So what is fiction? Fiction is a made up story where somebody makes up a story and other people in general read the story or watch a movie of it or a TV series of it or play a game of it, whatever it is. Generally, the word fiction is used for the books, but it applies to all of these other concepts as well. It's generally a made up story that people engage with for entertainment or for deriving a lesson or learning something. And fiction seems to have existed throughout human history. You can't really name any civilization or any time in history where there seems to be a lack of fiction. It seems that storytelling is a part of human nature. And making up myths and legends and stories and fables to convey lessons is something that humans have always been doing. Muslims as well. Throughout Muslim history, you will find many, many books containing both fiction and non-fiction, true stories and made-up stories. Very often, the fictional stories are there to teach us a lesson, to draw a point, to get us to understand something that would have been harder to understand without the story. And this has always been there throughout our history. It's only in recent times, I would say in the past 100 years, there have been a lot of fatwa stating that fiction is haram. And these fatwa are normally based on two reasons. Firstly, they say it's lying, and lying is haram. Secondly, they say it's wasting time, and wasting time is haram. Now, before I address the specific fatwa, this general mindset. This is a 20th and 21st century problem. This is a modern problem of wanting to declare everything under the sun haram. This is not the historical Islam. This is not the Islam of the early Muslims. They would not look for reasons to declare anything haram. They would default consider things halal unless there was really strong evidence that something was bad for society. Now, only when the evidence was like, the word we would use in fiqh is it's something definitive. It's something that, okay, you can see for sure this is harmful, this is bad. then they would use the word haram. But in the past 100 years, there have been some sects and movements that have come about to revive Islam. And some of these movements have taken a very fanatical, hardcore approach to Islam, where they have just gone about declaring everything haram, from videos to modern day technology, to entertainment. And so, of course, fiction gets lumped in as well. And it's from these movements only that you really see this fatwa, a very strong fatwa about fiction being haram. You won't really see it from mainstream scholars throughout history. It's something you'll see only from the past 100 years, as far as I've seen. I mean, I could be wrong. There could be fatwas before that. I haven't found any. Every fatwa I have found saying that this haram is from the past 100 years, and it's normally from these movements. I don't want to mention the movements by name because I don't want to start any sectarian politics over here. The focus is on the fatwa itself, not on which sect said it. Nonetheless, it is the same modern movements that are obsessed with declaring things haram that have said this. And their reasoning is very weak from an usul al-fiqh perspective, right? They say there's generally two reasons given for fiction being haram. The first is they say it's lying, and lying is haram. The second is that they say it's wasting time, and wasting time is haram. Now, tackling the first question, or the first position, that fiction is haram because it is lying. This is a very strange conclusion to come to, especially if you get into the definition of lying. Now, lying is haram in most situations, right? It becomes permissible when there's benefit in it for the ummah, where the benefits outweigh the harms. For example, when reconciling between people. So if there's two people who are fighting with each other, and you tell one, that guy said something nice about you, and you tell the other person, that person's missing you, and they reconcile because of those lies, those are good lies. Those aren't haram lies, those are halal lies. So even lying itself, there are exceptions to when it is haram. But the bigger point here is fiction lying? Because lying is an intention to deceive. It's where you tell someone something, but it's not true, and you want them to believe it's true. This is the key point. You want them to believe it's true, and it's not true. So, for example, if I had to come here and give a video or a lecture in which I had to tell a story about myself in a way that all of you believe that story, but that story is completely made up, that would be lying. On the other hand, if I had to sit here and say that here is an example, here is a parable, here's a made up story to learn a lesson from, and you hear that story and you take the lesson from it and you don't believe the story because I didn't want you to believe the story because I told you it's not a real story, that's not lying. That's fiction. Fiction is not lying. Because in fiction, you are not deceiving anyone. You don't expect people to believe the story. You are being very upfront that what you are saying is your imagination, your creativity, it's made up. It's not there with the intention to lie. Therefore, it cannot fall into the category of lies. And this is seen throughout our history. Throughout our history, people have been making up stories to teach lessons. And they make it very clear. They call it a mathal, they call it a parable, they call it a metaphor, they call it a fable. But whatever it is, it's fiction. It's a made-up story to teach a lesson. And most Muslims throughout history did not see anything wrong with this. It's a modern phenomenon to regard this as haram. The other perspective where people say it's wasting time, and my response to that is that's subjective. What's wasting time to one person is not necessarily wasting time to the other person. That you could read a fictional story and feel you wasted your time. Somebody else could read the same story and derive some moral benefits. They could use it for relaxing. They could use it to overcome burnout. They could use it as a break, as a task, as a break between work to revive their spirits. They could really learn something about human behavior from the story. There's so much to reading a book. You can't just blanketly say it's wasting time. That's a very subjective take. Furthermore, even if it is wasting time, it's not automatically haram. Because wasting time is not automatically haram. It depends on how much time you waste. Does it get in the way of other acts of ibadah? Does it become excessive? There are many other things to consider before you can pass the fatwa on it. So is fiction haram? The short answer is no. The short answer is no, because the general principle of fiqh is al-aslu fil ashai al-ibaha. The original ruling on anything is permissibility. Right? This is a maxim of fiqh. Al-ibahatul asliya, original permissibility. That the things of this world that humans invent are by default halal unless they can be proven haram. And fiction are human inventions. And unless you can prove them to be haram, they are halal. If someone has to make up a story because they believe that that story is going to entertain people, or more importantly, benefit people, and everybody knows it's a made up story, then it is not in of itself prohibited. We see this in another part of fiqh, right? So, for example, the issue of joking. There is the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that, woe to the one who tells lies to make people laugh. We see the same misunderstanding of this hadith. This hadith is talking about the phenomenon of when people make up a story about themselves that other people believe is true just to make people laugh. This is very common today with stand-up comedians. That they will get on stage and they will say, the other day this happened to me, and they'll make up a story and everybody would laugh and everybody would believe the story to be true. This is what is sinful. And this is what the hadith is talking about. On the other hand, if you have to tell people this is just a joke, this is just a made-up story, and then you have to tell the same story to make people laugh, that would not be what the hadith is talking about. That would not be haram. Why? Because you are not lying to anyone. You're not deceiving people into thinking that actually happened. You're being very clear that it's a fictional story for the purpose of jokes. A lot of people fail to make this distinction. But it's the same distinction that exists when it comes to fictional stories. So, thus far we've discussed that the fatwa stating that fiction is haram is, in my perspective, incorrect. If you believe it to be correct, then that's fine. That is an opinion of some ulama and you have every right to follow that opinion. But in my opinion, it is incorrect because the qiyas behind it, the reasoning behind it is weak. Declaring it a lying and a waste of time is incorrect. The original fiqh ruling of permissibility occurs or applies over here, and it's not necessarily wasting time. So, the next question I get about fiction is, how do we navigate it? How do we know whether what we're reading is good or bad, halal or haram? It's a very gray area, and the same applies to video games. The same applies to movies. The same applies to TV series, to cartoons, to basically any form of entertainment. How do we draw the lines? How do we figure out what we can and can't do? You see, another problem that we have today is that we want specific fatwas on everything. We want for every single movie a fatwa on whether it's halal or haram. We want on every single fictional book a fatwa on whether it's halal or haram. And that's generally not the way fiqh works. That's a very impractical approach to take to fiqh. There's no alim out there who's going to watch every single movie for you and then pass a fatwa and tell you that, oh, I watched it and now I know it's haram. It's not going to work like that. In general, the ulama are not going to watch movies at all, right? Because it's, especially for people with status and knowledge, it's something that's a waste of their time. And they can open up the doors of haram. So they will avoid it altogether. So to bring them a specific book or movie, a cartoon, and tell them, is this one halal? Is this one haram? You putting them in a position where they're going to have to look at it to see if it is. So instead of, for every single work of fiction that you deal with, asking if it's halal or haram, what we need to do as laymen, as average Muslims, is be responsible. We need to be responsible. And this is where I would say we go to the fatwa of the heart. When the Prophet ﷺ was asked what is sin, he said a sin is something that you don't feel right about in your heart and you don't want other people to know that you did it. Now take that concept and apply it to whatever you are doing. If you are watching a movie that makes you feel uneasy in your fitrah, in your nature, in your heart, and you would be embarrassed if any pious person knew you watched that movie, don't watch that movie. It's probably haram. right? Because your fitra knows better. It sends out that warning signal. It lets you know there's something wrong with it. It's the same with a book. You're reading a book and you feel uneasy and you feel embarrassed and you don't want people to know you read that book. You shouldn't be reading that book. So you don't need ulama to pass fatwas on every single movie, every single TV series. You need to be responsible. You need to look and say, okay, is this benefiting me? Is this good for me? Is this taking me away from Allah? Is this inciting my nafs? Is this making me desire sin? Is this poisoning my mind? We have to be critical thinkers. And we have to be very, very selective in what kind of entertainment we allow into our lives and the lives of our family. We can't expect specific fatwas from the ulama. This is something every individual needs to do for themselves. So this is where you trust your heart. And I want to give some general guidelines on what you can do over here. Right? The general guidelines when it comes to entertainment is number one, entertainment should be a side thing. It should not get in the way of your ibadah. It should not get in the way of your family relationships. It should not get in the way of your work and your career. It should be on the side. So if you prayed all your salah on time, you worked your work hours, you spend time with family, and the evening you're reading a novel for an hour, you playing video games with your kids for an hour, whatever it is, some small entertainment, that's okay. Right? That's the first point. That it's not taking up too much time. It's not getting in the way of your responsibilities. Number two is that it must not be vulgar. It must not be immoral. It must not be taking you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you are reading a fictional story that teaches you about responsibility, that teaches you about courage, that teaches you about stepping out of your comfort zone, or that teaches you about family ties, or even teaches you about Islam, because there are fictional stories that teach you about Islam, there's nothing wrong with this. But if you are engaging with a fictional story, whether it's through a movie or a TV series or a book that is inciting your nafs, making you want to commit zina, making you want to do evil, uh, making you question Islam, then you need to be responsible and avoid that. So it's up to us that we need to be responsible. Number one, these things should not be priorities. They should not be the most important thing in our lives. They should be on the side. Number two, we have to be responsible of what forms of entertainment we interact with, especially the content and how much time we spend with them. Number three is that we need to ensure, even for our children, that we give them guidelines. You see, when it comes to parenting, unfortunately, I notice two extremes amongst Muslims when it comes to entertainment. There are those who try to cut off everything from their children. They don't let the children play any video games or watch anything or do any of this. And most of the cases, I'm not saying all, most of the cases I've dealt with like this, the kids rebel, they go to someone else's house, they, they leave home, they grow up, they just watch everything, they have no filter, they have no way of differentiating good from evil. They just want to consume everything because they were deprived of everything when they were younger. That approach doesn't work. The other approach, where you just give them full freedom to do what they want, their minds are poisoned and brainwashed by all kinds of filthy media, that doesn't work either. What parents need to do is to sit the kids down and teach them responsibility. Teach them about what works, what are the Islamic guidelines you need to look at when choosing entertainment. So let your kids play video games in the evening if it's something that your family feels fine with, but help them choose video games that are not vulgar, because even video games these days can be vulgar. There are video games that have immorality in it. Many parents aren't even aware of that. They just buy their kids any video game. But like any other art form, video games these days can be vulgar. Help them choose video games that are not vulgar. Maybe ones that are beneficial. There are many that teach them strategy and business and creativity. That can be better for them. Um, Teach them, how to navigate when selecting entertainment. What's our limits as Muslims? What we would completely never engage with. What's something that's okay? What's a gray area? Uh, Engage with them on these topics. If they were at a friend's house and they saw a movie with immorality in it, explain to them why it's immoral. Explain to them why we as Muslims shouldn't be looking at those things or doing those things. Have these conversations with your kids. Again, it's all about personal responsibility. We can't, expect a lump sum fatwa to cover everything. And the problem with our fatwa approach today is that we want a fatwa that says all of it is halal or all of it is haram. While in reality, we have the general ruling that entertainment is halal as long as it's in moderation, but it's up to you to be responsible and only choose types of entertainment that don't go against the principles of Islam. The next question that arises related to fiction is what happens if there's no real vulgarness or nudity or something in it, but the characters you are watching or reading about are not Muslim, so they engaged in shirk. They might be engaged in magic, like in fictional stories like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings. There's like magical elements. Um, would this count as sihr? Would this count as shirk? And the short answer is no. The long answer is it depends on you as the reader, right? If you are someone who is easily influenced by what you read, so if you read a book about Christians, you become attracted towards Christianity, or you read a book about Greek mythology and you become attracted towards polytheism, then you should stay away from those resources, strengthen your aqidah, and study Islam, because that's a very dangerous position to be in. But if you are someone who is strong in your aqidah, strong in your iman, and you can read that book without it phasing you at all, like you're going to read a whole book about Greek mythology without it affecting your iman in Allah at all, you read it completely as this is fiction, these are made up stories that other people believe in, I know this to be kufr and fiction, and it doesn't affect your aqidah at all, then that wouldn't necessarily be a problem. So for these kind of stories, it really boils down to us as individuals, that you have to look at it and ask yourself, does this affect my iman? If it does, stay away from it and work on strengthening your iman first. If it doesn't, then no problem. In fact, I find for some people it strengthens their iman. What do I mean? So for example, look at a fictional work based on Greek mythology, with these Greek gods, so to say, like Zeus and Hercules and things like that. For someone, I find for a lot of young Muslims who have strong aqidah and a strong belief in Tawheed, when they see fictional works about these characters, it puts the impression in their mind that these characters are fictional and that these can never be gods, and that this polytheism makes no sense and this is an entirely fictional concept. So it actually strengthens their Tawheed and it strengthens their Iman, because seeing those characters in a fictional setting convinces them that that is fiction. So for such people, that would actually be beneficial, right? So this is another aspect. Even with the issue of magic. Now, this is a bit more of a controversial point. I know when I was a kid and Harry Potter came out and I read all the books, and a lot of our elders would get angry with us and say it's magic, it's sihr, how can you engage with that? Well, it's not really sihr, right? Sihr is interacting with the jinn to engage in real world magic. Uh, Harry Potter is a completely fictional concept, right? The only thing they have in common is the word magic. And a word does not mean the same thing in different contexts. The word magic, when a child is doing card tricks, is not the same as sihr. The word magic in a fictional story where people are born with powers is not the same as real world sihr. So it doesn't count as real world sihr. You know it to be a completely fake imaginary story, which has no bearing on the real world, and you're reading it to learn about the power of loving your children, or the importance of courage, or the importance of good triumphing over evil, uh, or just for entertainment, and it doesn't affect your aqidah at all, that would not be a problem in my opinion, and Allah knows best. The final point, and we'll close off on this point, people ask, what's the point of fiction? What's the benefit? So again, this actually pops up whenever I raise the question of I want to start writing fiction. I always have some, again, very well-meaning and loving brothers and sisters who tell me that will be a waste of my time and efforts. And they tell me that you should rather write books about fiqh, books of tafsir, books of history. Why would you waste your time with fiction? And it's the same with reading. They would say that it's what's the benefit? What's the point? So, from the perspective of writing, I would say the benefit of writing this is that you're going to reach people who you are not going to reach with a book of fiqh or tafsir. Because let's face it, not everybody reads tafsir books. It's a sad reality of our time. Not everybody reads fiqh books. I know I've written tafsir book, themes of the Quran. Maybe 1,000 people have read it. Perhaps if I write a fictional story where a character engages with the Quran and benefits from the Quran and is transformed by the Quran, and I include the exact same lessons in that story, it could reach many other people. People who read fiction but don't read books of tafsir. It's the same with fiqh. It's the same with history. Right? My book on Umar bin Abdul Aziz reached a few thousand people. Very beneficial book on history. Yet I know not everyone's going to read it. But if I write a fictional story with the same lessons, it'll reach other people. So it's not necessarily a waste of time because you are, or at least I am. My intention when I think about writing fiction is about reaching out to people who are not going to buy my non-fiction books and showing them the beauty of Islam, the truth of Islam, the power of Islam through storytelling. Storytelling can be a very powerful way to show Islam in a modern context to people who otherwise are not going to see it. People who are not going to read a history book, who are not going to read a tafsir book, and you want them to see the beauty of Islam. Fiction is probably the best way to reach them. Allah knows best. As for the benefits of fiction, there are many. It builds your vocabulary, it strengthens your creativity and imagination, but it also teaches you about human nature because most works of fiction are focused on human nature. They teach us about love, they teach us about courage, they teach us about bravery, they teach us about overcoming the odds, about patience, about perseverance, about responsibility, about how to deal with trials and obstacles. It's all about the triumph of the soul. That's the common theme across most works of fiction, where someone is put in an impossible situation and they find a way to overcome it. And people are inspired by these stories. And there's nothing wrong with taking that kind of inspiration from such stories. So I'll end off on this point. What would be the need of fiction in our times? I would say the need of fiction in our times is to reach people who are not already practicing Islam, or to provide halal entertainment for those who are practicing Islam but need entertainment. I see this particularly being a need for Muslim teenagers and young adults. You see, a lot of our work today either focuses on very small children, like 5 or 6 years old, or on adults, people in the mid 20s, 30s. Those are the two crowds we cater to these days. But when it comes to preteens, teenagers, young adults, we barely have anything at their age level. And at that age level, the easiest way to reach them is through works of fiction. Whether it's through Islamic movies or TV series or video games or novels, this is where you're going to get to them. And if you can put together something engaging, something exciting, something that catches on, something that millions of Muslim youth around the world are going to read or watch or play, and through that they experience Islam, through that they fall in love with Islam, through that they see the glory and beauty of Islam, and that opens the doors to them to start studying Islam, to start practicing Islam, then this is a great thing to do, alhamdulillah. And I see absolutely nothing wrong with it. So to end off and to summarize, fiction is not haram because it is not lying. It is using one's imagination to convey a lesson and to try and benefit people or entertain people. As long as a fictional story is not outright vulgar, it's not calling towards immorality, it's not a problem. Now, sometimes there may be some immorality by the way. For example, if it's a story about a Muslim man who committed zina and made tawbah, and the whole story is about tawbah and how to make tawbah, then that itself wouldn't be haram. But if it's promoting zina and trying to get people to commit zina, then that's a problem. Fiction is not necessarily a waste of time. It depends on the reader and whether they benefit from it or not. And finally, it is a need of our time. And if you are someone who has a strong imagination, great storytelling capabilities, and you have the means to either put together a movie or a TV series or a cartoon series or a video game, or none of that, write a novel or a comic book that can benefit Muslim teenagers, young Muslims who are otherwise consumed by the vulgar, immoral media that is out there, then you will be providing a halal alternative that is beneficial for them. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. May Allah forgive me if I said anything wrong and guide me towards understanding our religion properly. May He allow us to write only that which is beneficial and to say only that which is beneficial. I hope you found this short presentation a means of benefit for you, and I hope it has cleared up these few points. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comment section. I will deal with them whenever I check the comments for my videos. Jazakallah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.